Summer is here. Let's see what everyone's talking about. Lofi Poli Sci coming at you. Michael Pickering here with not another Tuesday's Top 10 list. Oh, no. It's summertime, peeps, and we gotta know just what the world is talking about going into the summer so we can see how it measures up to the semester that was, and we can see how things will change by the summer's end. So today, we're doing our third episode this year of Aggregate-Level content analysis of 100 international news stories from 10 online platforms. And we're following all the same rules to allow for maximum comparabilities to our previous list. And our 10 platforms are BBC World, AP or Associated Press World, Reuters World, NPR World, Fox World, CNN World, Washington Post World, New York Times World, Google News World, and Yahoo News World. Our previous two lists were done on March 13th, Sunday at 10:40 a.m., February 13th, Sunday, 10:40 a.m. again, 1 month apart from each other. Now today's list is on May 22nd, Sunday, 10:40 a.m., 2 months and 1 week after our last list. So for those of you listening here on Tuesday, you know, this was actually done on Sunday. But let's go ahead and jump into our findings for today, and then we can compare it to the past semester in February and March and see how things have changed or how they've stayed the same. So what did we find looking at 100 international news articles, 10 different platforms, and 10 articles on each platform? Well, we found that there were 39 different news stories covered out of 100 articles. So, not that good for news diversity, right? It means a lot of these platforms are covering all the same thing. But let's dig a little deeper. Of the 100 articles, 26 were about Ukraine and Russia, meaning just over 1 in 4, 26% of the 100 articles were about the Ukraine-Russia war or different dynamics or parts of it. Our second most covered story was, and oddly enough, I was so surprised at this one, the Australian election. 12 articles out of the 100 covered. I mean, wow, who would have known the world and all these different outlets were into Aussie politics? I dig it. Then was Haiti and Haitian politics and different things going on there. There were 8 different articles there. Then fourth place was North Korea and the US with 5 articles. And COVID was all the way down at 5th place with only 4 articles out of 100. Can you believe that? Global News has just up and left COVID coverage. Just to give you a point of perspective, on our very first list, COVID was 24 articles, meaning 24% of all covered. Today, 4 articles. That's a major drop. But let's get back to the list today. If we were to take our top 5 stories, add all of those articles together, out of the 100 articles we looked at, 55 articles, meaning 55% of all articles, only covered 5 stories. And there you have it. Not too great. But now let's compare to our other 2 lists and see what pops off, Because, yeah, we said, this list wasn't diverse or that list wasn't diverse, but how do they compare in diversity to each other? Now that's the question. So we'll do the number of different stories out of the 100 articles for each list. And then we'll do the top 2 stories and the number of articles that were covered for each list. So we'll do that for February 13th, March 13th, and then May 22nd. All right, let's do it. February 13th, 34 different global news stories out of 100 articles. 29 were about Ukraine, and this was 1 week before the invasion, mind you, okay? But 29 were about Ukraine, and 24 were about COVID, meaning in February, our top 2 stories made up 53% of that list. All right? Now, in March, on March 13th, 1 month later, 17 different global news stories out of 100. That's it. 68 were about Russia invading Ukraine, and this was 3 weeks after the invasion took place. So 68 were about Russia and Ukraine. 8 were about Iran. So together, our top 2 stories in March made up 76% of coverage on that list, compared to 53 in February. Now, on May 22nd, we had 39 different global news stories out of 100 articles. 26 were Ukraine and Russia. This was almost 3 months after the invasion started. 12 were about Australia elections. And our top 2 together made up 38% of coverage for this list. So oddly enough, as we started out by saying our list today showed a true lack of diversity of coverage amongst the 10 platforms covered, what we see by looking at the data from over the past 3 months and the 300 international news articles that we've surveyed, the May 22nd list is actually the most diverse of the 3 days that we've performed aggregate-level content analysis. There were more stories covered on our list today than on either of the 2 previous lists, with 39 today, then 34 in February, and 17 different stories in March. And our top 2 stories added together today made up a smaller percentage of total coverage than in either of the previous 2 lists. 38% of the articles today were about 2 stories, 53% were about the top 2 stories in February, and 76% were about the top 2 stories in March. And COVID coverage has decreased and decreased and decreased in global news content. And we're getting a bit more diversity than we have over the entire time period of the past 3 months. A bit. Let me stress that. Because there is something else we need to talk about. And it's the fact that our number 1s and number 2s on each list dominate coverage. Period. And we'll talk about Russia and Ukraine here in a second specifically, but the fact remains that just a couple of stories always seem to dominate international news coverage and Western media outlets everywhere. Now, why might that be the case? ? I'll give you a 10-second silent count to think about it. Why do the same few stories dominate over all platforms every time? Go. Are you ready for this? And you already know the answer. Regardless of if you guess it or not, I know you know it. Trendy, algorithms, clicks, money, consumer-based, market-driven, corporate-owned, free democratic press. That's why. And you know exactly what I mean. We talked about this before. We talked about it last week during the Connecting the Dots of our media and global news. Our data here simply support that in which we already knew. Our international news coverage, just like our domestic news coverage here, is dominated by the stories that we click on because it feeds the meter, pays the bills, and provides the data to entice advertisers to invest in media corporations. Simple as that. Now, not to harp on that too much, because like I said, we've talked about that before. But let's focus on the Russia and Ukraine coverage of the past 3 months. Out of 300 international news articles we've surveyed, 100 at a time on 3 separate Sundays, out of 300 articles, Russia-Ukraine account for 123 of those articles. That's 41% of the 300 articles over the past 3 months are about one thing. Now that's telling in and of itself. Now, I will say we have seen a bell curve in the data for that number. February, it was 29 articles. March, 68 articles. May, 26 articles. So, we started high, went even higher, and then came back down to almost the same level, a little bit below it, from a 29 to a 26 from beginning to end. But again, this list, we're seeing a lot more diversity in coverage, though still not diverse. All right? But why is that? Question mark. Why is it that we're starting to see more diversity? I do have a theory, though just a theory. And I'm curious. What do you think out there? And I'll give you a clue. It's not war news fatigue. It's something else. But give it a thought, write in, and as always, I'm curious your thoughts. And that's a brief snapshot of what's going on in the world today. Check out lofipolisci.com. Give Friday's blog post a read. And it's not a cliche or a catchphrase. It's a lifestyle. Always remember that Lofi Poli Sci is more than just me. It's the we that we be. Talk to you soon, Lofi listeners. Pickering, signing off. Oh, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. It has to do with summertime and you.